Trump's Justice Department carried out 2 federal executions this week, and they've scheduled 3 more before President-elect Joe Biden, who staunchly opposes capital punishment, officially takes office in January. Trump resumed federal executions in July during the ongoing pandemic after a 17-year hiatus. With me now, Josie Duffy Rice. She is the president of the appeal. Also with me, Rachel Barco. She is a New York University law professor and faculty director of the Center on the Administration of Criminal Law. She is also the author of the book, Prisoners of Politics, Breaking the Cycle of Mass Incarceration. All right, Josie, I wonder what you make of the expediting of these executions under the Trump administration in the middle of a pandemic.
I mean, it's absolutely unconscionable, right? It's 130 years since someone's been executed during a lame duck presidency. He's capping off the deadliest death penalty year on the federal level since the 1890s. We've never seen anything like this from a president in our lifetime, in our parents' lifetimes, and our grandparents' lifetimes, and it's deeply concerning in a country that continues to show less and less support for the death penalty with every passing year.
Right, and I do want to come back to you on the politics of that. But first, Rachel, on Biden's website, his campaign says he would pass legislation to eliminate the death penalty at the federal level and incentivize states to follow that example. What would it take for President-elect Biden to make good on that promise?
Well, I should say one thing he could do on his own without even waiting for legislation is he could commute the sentences of everyone who has a death sentence at the federal level. That's something President Obama actually could have done before he left office, and that would have meant that none of the people that we're seeing executed now would have been executed. So he himself can clear out anyone who's on death row that isn't already executed, obviously, by the Trump administration. In terms of getting legislation passed, that requires working with the Senate, and I think that won't be an easy climb for him, but he can certainly make the effort to do so, and I hope he does.
Josie, according to the Death Penalty Information Center, since 1973, more than 170 people who had been wrongly convicted and sentenced to death in the U.S. have been exonerated. What's the most common argument? I mean, you have this conversation all the time that you hear when people propose alternatives to the death penalty.
People always say an eye for an eye, right? But this is the only crime in which we consider it an eye for an eye. We don't steal, we don't, burglarize people's houses because they were, because they burglarized someone else's. We don't rape rapists. We choose to execute people who have committed murder, even when we know that, like Brandon Bernard, at this point in our history, they probably wouldn't have been convicted at all. Brandon Bernard's crime was committed in 1999. Today, because of his age and his culpability, he likely would not even have get the death penalty. So the fact that we continue to execute people, to kill them, even in cases where today there would be a different punishment, is sort of beyond the pale. The death penalty, the arguments for the death penalty have been refuted time after time by people like Rachel, by people who have been doing this work over and over again. It doesn't have a deterrent effect. It's a racist policy. Like you said, we have executed innocent people in this country, and what we see is that the public is responding to that. They don't support the death penalty like they used to, like I mentioned earlier, and yet we see an administration that is hell bent on killing people in the last few weeks they have in this office.
Rachel, part of the reason that this is so confounding is that criminal justice reform has actually taken on this bipartisan lens. I wonder, is that true as well when you talk about eliminating the death penalty, and what would it take to get it there?
Yeah, the hard part with the criminal justice reform efforts has been that it's mainly targeted nonviolent offenses. And so when we're talking about the category of people who are getting the death penalty, these are crimes that involve violence. And it's much harder to get a bipartisan coalition together. So I think in order to form that in the context of the death penalty, it really is less about what crimes these people have committed. And it's really asking, do you trust the state to kill people? Do you trust the government to make good decisions, to really select the worst of the worst, to give fair process, to not be racially discriminatory? And I think when you start to ask Democrats and Republicans alike, there's a lot of mistrust in terms of the government's competency to carry out any number of things. So why would you give the government the power to kill somebody? I think that's the ground on which you might get some bipartisan consensus. I think when it comes to criminal justice reform more generally, it has been limited to these nonviolent offenses. So I do think for this category of people, it's more about state power to kill than it is anything else.
All right, Josie and Rachel, thank you both.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.